She wasn't supposed to be running for her life on her wedding day. But Lady Clara Ashworth's bridal lace was torn by thorns, her shoes were ruined by mud, and the man she was promised to was a monster. Her only hope was the dark, churning River Thames. But when she reached the bank, her escape route was blocked, not by her pursuers but by a lone, imposing stranger. He was the Duke of Blackwood, a man with a reputation as cold as the water at her feet, and in his hand he held not a lifeline, but a legal document, a marriage contract. The sharp crack of a twig behind her sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through Clara's heart. She stifled a sob, pressing her hand against her mouth, the taste of mud and terror on her glove. She could not, would not be caught. Not now, not when she was so close. Lady Clara Ashworth had been running for just over an hour, an eternity of panicked flight through the dense, unwelcoming woods bordering her uncle's estate. The costly white silk of her wedding dress was a mockery, stained with grime and ripped at the hem, a visible shredding of the life she was supposed to accept. The man she was fleeing was Lord Mortimer, a man 3 times her age with a reputation for cruelty that was whispered in drawing rooms from Mayfair to Bath. Her uncle, Lord Bromwell, had signed her away for a handful of silver, settling his gambling debts by selling his niece. "He will provide for you, Clara," Bromwell had insisted, his eyes refusing to meet hers. "Mortimer is a man of influence. He has connections in Parliament, holds sway at Lloyd's of London. You will be a fool to defy him." But Clara had seen the look in Mortimer's eyes. It was not the look of a protector. It was the look of a collector, a man who acquired beautiful things and broke them for his pleasure. She had seen how his young ward flinched from his touch, how his servants moved with a terrified, silent speed. She would not be his next broken thing, so she had waited until the moment of the ceremony, feigned a swoon, and in the ensuing chaos had slipped out a servant's entrance and fled. Now her pursuers were closing in. She could hear the heavy, crashing footsteps of Mortimer's thuggish footman, Geoffrey, and the distinctive wheezing bay of her uncle's own hounds. They were not tracking a deer, they were tracking her. Her lungs burned, a sharp, searing pain with every gasp of the damp night air. She had been running toward the river. It was a desperate, unformed plan. Perhaps she could find a boat. Perhaps she could bribe a ferryman. Perhaps she would simply swim until the current took her, a preferable fate to Lord Mortimer's bedchamber. She burst through the last line of weeping willows, her ruined slippers sliding on the muddy embankment. And there it was, the River Thames, wide, dark, and indifferent. It was her escape, her last hope. But her hope died in her throat. She was not alone. Standing at the water's edge, as if carved from the twilight itself, was a man. He wasn't one of her pursuers. This man was tall, dressed not in livery or the gaudy silks of her uncle's crowd, but in a perfectly tailored black coat that spoke of immense, understated wealth. He stood with his back to her, looking out over the water, his posture rigid. A horse, a magnificent black stallion, was tethered to a nearby tree, standing as silent and still as its master. Clara froze. Had Mortimer posted guards everywhere? Was this a trap? The man turned, not with a start, but with a slow, deliberate motion, as if he had been expecting her all along. In the fading light, she saw a face that was not kind. It was handsome, yes, but in a harsh, angular way. His jaw was square, his nose straight, and his eyes, even from 10 paces, she could feel their intensity. He looked to be around 30, a man in his prime, and he radiated an aura of absolute, unassailable control. She knew who he was. Everyone in society knew of him, though few had seen him. Arthur Grayson, the reclusive and formidable Duke of Blackwood, a man who had inherited a title steeped in power and shadow, a man who hadn't been seen at a London ball in 5 seasons. The baying of the hounds grew closer, a frantic, ugly sound that tore the night apart. "Lady Clara Ashworth," the Duke said. His voice was not a question. It was a statement, a deep baritone that carried easily in the still air, cutting through the sounds of the chase. Clara took an involuntary step back, her heel sinking deep into the mud. "How do you know my name?" "I know a great many things," he said, taking a step toward her. He did not look at her torn dress or her tear-streaked face. His gaze was locked on hers, unnervingly direct. "I know you are fleeing, Lord Mortimer. I know your uncle has sold you, and I know that your pursuers are perhaps 2 minutes from this very spot." The hounds were thunderously close now. She could hear Geoffrey shouting, "This way, down to the river!" Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She looked wildly at the water, then back at the Duke. "Please," she whispered, the word ripped from her. "Please, Your Grace, you must help me. I can pay, I have jewellery." "I am not interested in your jewellery," he said, his voice devoid of pity. He reached into the breast pocket of his coat. Clara flinched, her mind racing. A weapon! He did not produce a pistol. He produced a folded piece of thick, creamy parchment tied with a dark blue ribbon. He held it out to her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It is your escape route, Lady Clara," the Duke stated, "a more permanent one than a cold river." She looked at the document, confused. The shouts were just beyond the trees. She had seconds. "What is it?" she demanded, desperation making her bold. The Duke of Blackwood took another step, his shadow falling over her. "It is a special license," he said, his voice flat. "And a marriage contract. You have one choice, and you have it now. You will be found by Lord Mortimer, who will drag you back to an altar and a life of misery. Or you will sign this document, and you will marry me. Now." Clara stared at him, her mind unable to process the sheer audacity. This was madness, swapping one monster for another. "You," she breathed, "you want to marry me? Why?" "My reasons are my own," he said curtly. The first hound burst from the trees, skidding to a halt at the sight of the Duke's stallion. Geoffrey was right behind it. "There she is!" the man roared, pointing a thick finger. "And who in the—" The Duke of Blackwood turned his head, a slight, dismissive movement. "You have 10 seconds, Lady Clara. Mortimer or me." Geoffrey lunged forward. Clara looked at the brute's leering face, at the promise of Mortimer's cruelty reflected there. Then she looked at the Duke, a man as cold and unreadable as the night, but a man who was not Mortimer. "Where do I sign?" she stammered. A flicker of something, triumph, satisfaction, passed through the Duke's dark eyes. He produced a small, silver-cased pen from his waistcoat. "Here," he said, unfurling the document against the trunk of the willow tree. "By your name." Her hand was shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen. With the hound barking and Geoffrey closing the distance, Clara Ashworth, the thorn-torn bride, signed away her life for the 2nd time that day. "Stop!" Geoffrey bellowed, now only a few feet away. The Duke of Blackwood calmly took the contract, blew the ink dry, and folded it. He turned to face the apoplectic footman. "You will stand down!" the Duke commanded. His voice had changed. It now held a steel edge that vibrated with power. "She belongs to Lord Mortimer. By order of her guardian." Geoffrey spat, puffing out his chest. "She belonged to Lord Mortimer," the Duke corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. He stepped in front of Clara, shielding her with his body. As of 30 seconds ago, She belongs to me. You are addressing the Duchess of Blackwood, and I suggest you do so on your knees or not at all." Geoffrey's jaw dropped. He stared at the Duke, then at Clara, his small mind finally processing the insignia on the Duke's stallion, the air of command, the impossible, world-tilting statement. The Duke didn't wait for a response. He grabbed Clara's arm, his grip like a manacle, and pulled her towards the horse. "This way, Your Grace." He half lifted, half threw her onto the saddle, mounting behind her in one fluid motion. Clara clung to the stallion's mane, her heart hammering against her ribs, the contract signed, her fate sealed. As the great horse reared and tore through the woods, away from the river, away from her past, she caught one last glimpse of Geoffrey, standing stunned and open-mouthed on the muddy riverbank. Her escape route had not led to freedom. It had led to a cage, albeit a different one. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, and she had no idea what that meant, other than that she was the property of the cold, terrifying man whose arms were now wrapped around her, like steel bands, carrying her into a new and unknown darkness. The ride was a brutal, wind-swept blur. The Duke of Blackwood did not spare the horse, nor did he speak a word to her. Clara was pressed firmly against his chest, her cheek against the rough wool of his coat, which smelled faintly of leather, soap, and cold night air. She was acutely aware of the sheer power in his arms as he controlled the stallion, navigating the dark woods with a terrifying and familiar ease. She was in shock. Her mind raced, replaying the scene at the riverbank, the contract, the signature, Duchess of Blackwood. The title felt alien, a costume she had been forced into. She had escaped Lord Mortimer, a man she knew to be a villain. But what had she run to? Who was Arthur Grayson? The whispers of society were all she had. They called him the Iron Duke, a man who had taken his father's scandal-ridden, debt-laden title and, through sheer force of will and rumoured ruthlessness, restored its fortune in less than 3 years. He'd done it by foreclosing on dying estates, by cutting off old family friends, and by disappearing completely from the social world. He was a recluse, a pragmatist, a man without sentiment, and he was now her husband. Or was he? The contract was signed, but there had been no vows, no clergyman. "Where are you taking me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice hool-darse. "To safety," he replied, his voice a rumble against her ear. It was not reassuring. "Was that a legal marriage?" "It will be," he said. They burst from the woods onto a main carriage road, and there, tucked into a shadowed alcove, was a dark, unmarked travelling carriage, its 4 horses already harnessed and steaming in the cool air. A coachman stood at the ready, his face impassive. The Duke brought his stallion to a halt. He dismounted first, then reached up for her. His hands were strong on her waist, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. Her legs, weak and trembling, almost buckled when she hit the ground. He did not release her. He kept his hand on her arm and propelled her toward the carriage. The coachman opened the door. "Get in, Lady Clara." "You called me Duchess before," she said, a spark of defiance flashing through her terror. His dark eyes met hers. "I will call you Duchess when a man of God has said the words. Until then, you are my fiancée, and we are committing a social impropriety of the highest order by being alone. Get in." She climbed in, her torn dress catching on the step. The interior was dark, upholstered in rich, unadorned leather. It was meticulously clean, functional, and utterly devoid of comfort. Like the man himself. He climbed in after her, and the carriage was suddenly very small. He sat opposite her, his knees nearly touching hers. He filled the space, a dark, brooding presence that seemed to suck the very air from the compartment. He tapped on the roof, and the carriage lurched into motion, moving at a speed that was just short of reckless. "Why?" she asked again, her voice stronger now. The immediate physical danger had passed. "Why me? You could have any woman in England. Why this ambush?" The Duke leaned his head back against the squabs, his eyes closing for a brief second. He looked tired, but not weary. He looked burdened. "You misunderstand your value, Lady Clara," he said, his eyes opening, pinning her with their intensity. "You are valuable not for who you are, but for what you are. You are the niece of Lord Bromwell. You are of noble blood. And most importantly, you were available." "Available," she repeated, insulted. "I was running for my life. Presses deli." "You were desperate," he said, with no trace of sympathy. "Desperation makes people compliant. I needed a wife. You needed a savior. It is a simple, straightforward transaction." "A transaction," she echoed, the word tasting like ash. "My life, my future, my very body is a transaction to you." "It is," he stated, as if discussing the price of grain, "and a transaction I have now secured. Lord Mortimer will not have you. Your uncle will not profit from you. You are mine." The finality of it, the cold, possessive statement, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. "And what do you get, Your Grace? What is so important that you must snatch a bride from a riverbank in the middle of the night?" He was silent for a long time. The carriage rattled over the rutted road, the rhythm of the horse's hooves a drumbeat marking her new life. "I get what I need," he said at last, his voice low. "I have a situation at Blackwood, one that requires my immediate marriage to a woman of suitable standing. Your flight from Mortimer was a fortunate coincidence. I had been investigating other options. None were as suitable, or as immediate." "You knew I would run," she whispered, the pieces clicking into place. "You weren't just passing by." "I knew your uncle. I knew Mortimer. And I knew your father, the late Earl," he said. "Your father was an honourable man. He would never have allowed this. I knew you possessed a spine. I wagered that you would not go to Mortimer like a lamb. I stationed men to watch your uncle's estate for the past week. Tonight, my scout reported a bride had bolted. I surmised her destination. The river is always the destination. He hadn't just intercepted her. He had planned her. He had calculated her desperation, predicted her path, and laid his trap. It was a masterpiece of cold, strategic thinking. Clara felt a strange, unwelcome flicker of admiration mixed with her terror. She had not been saved by a hero. She had been claimed by a master strategist. "And now?" she asked. "Now, we fetch a clergyman," the Duke said. The carriage slowed, turning off the main road and onto a smaller, less travelled lane. After a few minutes, it stopped. The Duke opened the door and stepped out. Clara followed, emerging into a small, dark churchyard. A small vicarage stood beside the ancient, crumbling church, its windows dark. "Wait here," the Duke commanded, and strode to the vicarage door. He did not knock politely. He hammered on the wood, a sound that cracked the silence of the night. A light appeared in an upstairs window. A moment later, a quavering voice called out, "Who is there? Begone! It's the middle of the night." "It is the Duke of Blackwood, Vicar," Arthur Grayson shouted back, his voice echoing. "I require your services. Open this door, or I shall have it removed." There was a frantic, scrambling sound from within. Bolts were drawn, and the door was opened by a small, terrified-looking man in a nightshirt and cap, holding a wavering candle. "Your Grace," he stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "My apologies. I did not expect." You are not paid to expect, Mr. Davies. You are paid to serve, the Duke said, brushing past him into the small house. Fetch your book. I am to be married. Married? The vicar squeaked, his eyes darting to Clara, who stood in the doorway, a vision of mud and torn silk. Tonight? But the band's the license. The license is here, the Duke said, producing the contract from his coat. A special license, signed and sealed by the Archbishop himself. You will find my authority and my donation in order. He tossed a heavy purse onto the vicar's small table. It landed with a definitive, heavy thud. The vicar's eyes went from the purse to the Duke's face, and back again. The fear was replaced by a dawning, greedy comprehension. Of course, Your Grace. Of course, at once. Shall I light the church? No, the Duke said. We will be married here, in your parlour. It is quicker. But Your Grace, the bride, she is— The bride is cold, the Duke interrupted, and we are in a hurry. Proceed, Vicar. And so, in a dusty, moth-eaten parlour, lit by a single candle held by a trembling vicar, Lady Clara Ashworth became the Duchess of Blackwood. The ceremony was a blur. Clara was numb, her body shaking from cold and shock. She repeated the vows when prompted, her voice a hollow echo of itself. I, Clara, take thee, Arthur. The Duke's voice, in contrast, was strong and clear, his vows spoken with the same contractual finality as his words at the river. He placed a ring on her finger. It wasn't a delicate band of gold. It was a thick, heavy signet ring, pulled from his own pinky finger. It was cold against her skin and ridiculously large. I now pronounce you man and wife, the vicar finished, sweating despite the chill in the room. Arthur Grayson turned to her. In the flickering light, his face was all shadows and angles. He was her husband. He leaned in. Clara flinched, thinking he meant to kiss her. He did not. He merely looked at the signet ring on her finger. It will have to do until I can have one made, he said. He then turned to the vicar. All business. You will not speak of this, Mr. Davies. You will not speak of the hour, or the state of my wife. You will record this marriage as having taken place at a civilized hour tomorrow morning. Your generous donation depends on your discretion. Yes, Your Grace. Of course, Your Grace. Not a word, not a soul. The Duke nodded curtly. He took Clara's arm again, his grip proprietary, and led her back to the carriage. As they settled back into the compartment, the reality of her situation hit Clara with the force of a physical blow. She had escaped Mortimer. She had escaped the uncle who had betrayed her. She had done so by running straight into the arms of a man who saw her as a fortunate coincidence, a transaction, a solution to a problem she could not begin to understand. Welcome to the family, Your Grace, Arthur Grayson said, his voice laced with an irony so cold it burned. The carriage plunged back into the darkness, carrying the new Duchess of Blackwood to her new home, an estate as dark and imposing as the man who was now her master. The ultimatum had been given and accepted. The trap was sprung. The journey to Blackwood Manor took the rest of the night. Clara must have drifted into an exhausted, trauma-induced sleep, her head lolling against the leather squabs because she was jolted awake by the carriage slowing to a halt. The first grey light of dawn was filtering through the windows, painting the world in shades of ash. She sat up, her body stiff and aching. The Duke was exactly as she had left him, sitting opposite, his arms crossed, his eyes open. He looked as if he had not slept, nor had he any need of it. "We are here," he said. Clara looked out the window, and her stomach tightened. Blackwood Manor was not a home. It was a fortress. It rose from the morning mist like a jagged cliff, a sprawling monolith of dark stone, all imposing towers and narrow, severe windows. It was a place built to keep the world out, or to keep something, or someone in. The carriage rolled to a stop before a massive, iron-studded oak door. It opened before they had even fully stopped, revealing a line of servants. They were dressed in impeccable, sombre livery, standing as still and silent as statues. The Duke stepped out, and this time offered her his hand. It was a formal, cold gesture, acknowledging her new status. She placed her trembling, grimy hand in his, and he helped her down. Standing on the steps, she felt the full weight of her new life. The servants stared, not at her, but through her. Their faces were blank, professional, and utterly without welcome. At their head stood a woman in her late 50s, ramrod straight in a severe black dress. Her grey hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull at her face. "Your Grace," the woman said, her voice as crisp and cold as the morning. She dipped her head in a shallow, correct curtsy, her eyes scanning Clara's appearance, the mud, the torn silk, the exhaustion, with open disapproval. "Mrs. Finch," the Duke acknowledged with a curt nod. "This is the Duchess of Blackwood, my wife." If the staff was shocked by this sudden, bizarre development, they didn't show it. Not a single eyebrow was raised. It was a display of absolute, terrifying discipline. "Your Grace," Mrs. Finch said to Clara, the words flat. "Welcome to Blackwood." It did not sound like a welcome. It sounded like a sentence. "Mrs. Finch will show you to your rooms," the Duke said, already turning away, his mind clearly on other matters. "Have a bath drawn, and send for a modiste from the village. The Duchess has no wardrobe." The implication was clear. She had arrived with nothing, as a beggar. She was beholden to him for everything, from the roof over her head to the clothes on her back. "Of course, Your Grace," Mrs. Finch said. "And your rooms?" "The Duchess will take the Ancaster suite, in the east wing," he replied without hesitation. A flicker of something, the first emotion Clara had seen, crossed Mrs. Finch's face. Surprise? But it was gone in an instant. "The east wing, Your Grace?" "That is what I said," he snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin. "See to it." "Arthur?" Clara said, the name feeling strange on her tongue. He stopped and turned, his expression impatient. "My things," she said, her voice small. "At my uncle's. My mother's letters. A few possessions." The Duke's face hardened. "You have no possessions. Your uncle will be informed that his ward has made an advantageous match. Lord Mortimer will be informed that the property he sought is no longer on the market. Anything left in that house is part of a life you have left behind. You are a Grayson now. You will look forward, not back." He strode off down a dark, wood-panelled corridor, his boot heels echoing like gunshots, leaving Clara alone with the stone-faced housekeeper. Mrs. Finch's gaze returned to Clara. The disapproval was now mixed with a cold, clinical assessment. "If you will follow me, Your Grace." Clara followed the housekeeper through the cavernous, cold house. It was immaculate, but unlived in. Furniture was shrouded in dust covers in many rooms. The air was still and smelled of wax polish and old stone. There were no flowers, no paintings, no sign of life. The east wing was clearly disused. The dust here was thicker, the air colder. Mrs. Finch opened a set of double doors to reveal a massive suite of rooms. They were magnificent, but like a tomb. The furniture was heavy, dark, and draped in holland covers. "This was the late Duchess's suite," Mrs. Finch said, her voice flat. "His Grace's mother. It has not been opened in 20 years. Clara's blood ran cold. He had put her in his dead mother's rooms, in a wing of the house that was clearly abandoned. It was not a gesture of honor. It was a gesture of isolation. He was storing her. "I will send the maids to start the fires and draw a bath," Mrs. Finch said, her hand on the door. "They will also burn that." She nodded toward Clara's wedding dress. "No," Clara said, her voice sharp. Mrs. Finch paused. "Your Grace?" "It was my mother's, the lace. Please just have it cleaned, not burned." The housekeeper looked at her for a long, calculating moment. "As you wish. Breakfast will be served in your rooms in 1 hour. The Duke takes his breakfast in his study. He is not to be disturbed." And with that, she was gone, closing the doors with a soft, final click, leaving Clara alone in the vast, cold, dusty suite. A few minutes later, a pair of young maids entered, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. But they did not speak. They moved with silent efficiency, starting a fire in the grate, pulling the covers off the furniture, and dragging in a hip bath, filling it with steaming water. Clara sank into the hot water, her body screaming with relief. As the grime of her escape washed away, the numbness in her mind began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She was a prisoner, a very well-appointed, high-status prisoner, but a prisoner nonetheless. Arthur Grayson had not saved her. He had acquired her. He had married her in a cold, sham ceremony, isolated her in a dead woman's rooms, and made it clear she was his possession, a tool to solve a situation. The iron vow. It had been spoken in that dusty parlor, a vow of obedience. To love, honor, and obey. Love was not part of the bargain. Honor was a mockery. But obedience, he would expect that. She got out of the bath, her skin pink. A plain woolen wrapper, clearly belonging to a servant, had been laid out for her. She put it on. The modiste would not arrive for hours, perhaps days. She was trapped in this wing, in this house, with nothing. A small, timid knock came at the door. One of the young maids, a girl not much older than 16, entered carrying a tray. "Your breakfast, Your Grace," the girl whispered, setting it on a table near the fire. "Thank you," Clara said. "What is your name?" The girl looked up, terrified. "Sarah, Your Grace." "Sarah, Clara hesitated. "Where is the Duke's study?" Sarah's eyes went wide. "Oh no, Your Grace. No one goes to the study. Mrs. Finch says—" "I am not Mrs. Finch," Clara said, her voice gentle but firm. "I am your Duchess, and I need to know." Sarah, caught between two authorities, looked miserable. It's in the West Wing, Your Grace, at the end of the long gallery. But he truly is not to be disturbed. He works on the accounts." There was something in the way she said "accounts" that piqued Clara's interest. It was a euphemism. "Thank you, Sarah, that will be all." The girl curtsied and fled. Clara looked at the breakfast, coddled eggs, toast, tea. She ate, forcing herself to swallow every bite. She would need her strength. She was not a porcelain doll. She was not her uncle's pawn, and she would not be the Duke's prisoner. He had wagered on her desperation. He had not wagered on her intelligence. He had not wagered on her spirit. She finished her breakfast, her mind working, a new resolve hardening inside her. He had bought her, yes. He had signed her name in his ledger as a transaction. But a contract works both ways. She was the Duchess of Blackwood. She was mistress of this house, and she would damn well find out what situation was so dire it required him to buy a wife off a riverbank. She put on the ill-fitting servant's robe, tied its rope belt tightly, and walked to the door. She would not be confined to the East Wing. She would not be hidden away. She would explore her new prison, and she would find its secrets. And she would start with the master of the house. She left the suite and turned her face toward the west wing. The house was a labyrinth. Clara walked for what felt like miles, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floors. She kept to the servants' corridors she found behind a disguised tapestry, her mind sharp, memorizing turns and staircases. She felt like a ghost in her own home, haunting the back halls while the life of the manor, silent and repressed as it was, happened elsewhere. She finally emerged into the long gallery, a vast, echoing chamber lined with portraits. She paused, her breath catching. These were the Graysons, dozens of them, staring down with the same cold, assessing eyes she knew from her husband. They were a lineage of powerful, uncompromising men, and their pale, somber wives. At the very end of the hall was a single, small portrait, hung almost as an afterthought. It was a young girl, perhaps 10 years old, with pale blonde hair and the Duke's same dark, intense eyes. But where his held command, hers held a deep, abiding terror. As Clara looked at the painting, a sound echoed from the end of the gallery, a soft, whimpering sound. A cry. Clara followed it, her heart pounding. It led her not to the Duke's study, but to a set of doors slightly ajar, just before the West Wing's main staircase. She pushed the door open. It was a nursery, or it had been. It was now sparse, with a simple bed, a wardrobe, and a single chair. And on the bed, huddled under a blanket, was the source of the crying. It was the girl from the portrait. She looked up as Clara entered, her eyes wide and terrified. She scrambled off the bed and backed into a corner, clutching a worn, headless doll. "Who are you?" the girl whispered, her body trembling. "Are you one of his?" The question was bizarre. "One of whose?" Clara asked, keeping her voice soft, her hands open and visible. "Cousin Rupert's," the girl breathed. "Did he send you? Did he win?" "No," Clara said, confused. "My name is Clara. I live here now." "You can't," the girl said, shaking her head, her pale hair flying. "No one lives here. Just me and Arthur. And Mrs. Finch. We're waiting. He's coming." This was not the greeting Clara had expected. "Who are you, child?" "I am Amelia Grayson," the girl said, drawing herself up with a touch of the family pride. "Arthur is my brother." The Duke had a sister, a young, terrified sister who lived in a sparse room and spoke of a mysterious, threatening Cousin Rupert. "Amelia," Clara said, kneeling to be on her level, ignoring the cold floor. "I am Arthur's wife." Amelia's eyes widened. "His wife? But he didn't, he would—" She trailed off, her brow furrowing. "When?" "Last night," Clara said simply. A slow, calculating look entered the child's eyes, replacing the fear. It was a look so reminiscent of the Duke that it startled Clara. "Last night? Was it before midnight?" "Yes," Clara said. "Why?" Amelia's shoulders slumped, a wave of palpable relief washing over her. "Oh, that's good. That's very good." She finally uncurled from the corner. "He did it. He really did it." "Did what?" Clara pressed. But the girl's moment of openness was gone. She was once again the wary, haunted child. "He'll be angry you're here. You should go. He doesn't like people in my rooms." "Arthur?" "Yes. He says I must be quiet. I must be invisible. Until the birthday." Before Clara could ask whose birthday, the door to the room flew open. Arthur Grayson stood in the doorway, his face a mask of thunder. He was no longer the cold, controlled man from the carriage. This was pure, undiluted rage. "Get out," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. Amelia whimpered and shrank back. "I said," he repeated, taking a step into the room. "Get out." "Arthur, stop! You're scaring her," Clara said, rising to her feet, instinctively moving to stand between the Duke and his sister. "You!" he seethed, grabbing Clara's arm. His grip was bruising. "You will come with me. Now. You do not go where you are not permitted. You do not speak to those you are not permitted to." He dragged her from the room, pulling her down the hall toward the study Sarah had warned her about. He threw open the massive oak doors and shoved her inside, slamming them shut behind him. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" he roared. Clara, her arm throbbing, felt her own temper, long suppressed, finally ignite. "What am I doing? What are you doing? You have a child, a sister, locked in this house, terrified, talking in riddles about a cousin Rupert and a birthday. You have her hidden away like a dirty secret. You married me as a transaction, stuck me in your dead mother's rooms, and expect me to simply, what? Vanish? I am your wife, Arthur. You may have bought me, but I will not be your prisoner or your ghost." He stared at her, his chest heaving. The rage in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, a cold, shocked calculation. He had expected a terrified, compliant girl. He had not expected this. "You will not go near her again," he said, his voice quiet, but more threatening than his roar. "Or what?" Clara challenged, rubbing her arm. "You'll strike me, like Lord Mortimer would have. Is that what this is? Did I simply trade a public brute for a private one?" He flinched. The blow landed. He visibly recoiled, his face pale. He turned away from her, running his hands through his dark hair. "You do not understand," he ground out. "Then make me understand," she cried. "I am the Duchess of Blackwood. You made me that. I am mistress of this house, and that girl is my sister now. I will not stand by and watch you terrorize her." He was silent for a full minute, his back to her. He was looking at his desk, which was not covered in ledgers but in legal documents, stacks of them, tied with red ribbon. "You have no idea what you have walked into," he said, his voice heavy with a weariness she had not heard before. "You think you are a prisoner? Lady Clara, you are a shield." "A shield? Against what?" He turned. His face was ravaged, not by anger, but by a bone-deep exhaustion. Against him. Against Rupert. "Cousin Rupert," Clara breathed. "My father's nephew. A man who embodies every sin my father ever committed. A gambler, a degenerate, a man who would sell his own soul for a coin. What does he have to do with Amelia?" Arthur walked to his desk and picked up a thick, bound document. He threw it on the desk. "My father's will," he said. "The last testament of a cruel, vindictive man. He hated me, Clara. He hated that I was not like him. He hated that I cleaned up his messes, that I rebuilt the fortune he squandered. And so he left me a parting gift. A trap." Clara, her anger fading, moved toward the desk. She looked at the will. "He loved Amelia," Arthur continued, his voice hollow. "Or, as close as he could come to love. He saw her as his last, pure Grayson legacy. And he did not trust me with her. He thought I was too cold, too pragmatic. He thought I would wrong her somehow. So he wrote this," Arthur said, tapping the will. "He made me Amelia's guardian. Yes, but with a condition, a single insane clause." He opened the document to a marked page, his finger landing on a paragraph. Clara read it. "And it is my final decree that the guardianship of my daughter, Amelia Catherine Grayson, shall remain with my son, Arthur James Grayson, Duke of Blackwood, only on the condition that he prove himself a settled and responsible man. Therefore, should he remain unwed upon the occasion of his 30th birthday, his guardianship shall be immediately revoked, and all care and control of the person and fortune of Amelia Catherine Grayson shall pass to my nominated alternate, my beloved nephew, Mr. Rupert Grayson. Clara's blood ran cold. His 30th birthday, she whispered, looking up at her husband. When is it? In 3 days, Arthur said, his voice flat. It all clicked. The situation, the immediacy, the desperate need for a wife, any wife, of noble blood. Rupert he knew. He has been counting the days for a decade, Arthur spat. He's been circling, waiting for me to fail. And he has been working with Lord Mortimer. Mortimer, of course. Mortimer is powerful. He has connections. Rupert has the legal claim. Their plan was simple. Mortimer would ensure I remained unmarried. He would use his influence, his wealth, to outbid me for any suitable bride, or to spread rumors to scare off their families. He would tie me up in court. He was in fact, succeeding. And then I ran, Clara said. And then you ran, Arthur agreed, right into my lap. Mortimer and Rupert's plan was twofold. Rupert would get Amelia's fortune, and Mortimer, as Rupert's new, powerful friend, would get you. He was planning to take you from your uncle one way or another. My intervention ruined both their plans in a single night. Clara sank into a chair, her mind reeling. So this marriage, it's all about Amelia. It's to save her. It is all, Arthur said, his eyes burning into hers, about saving her from Rupert. The man would sell her, or marry her off to one of his degenerate friends. He would destroy her. I will not let that happen. This is why she's hidden, Clara murmured. This is why she's so frightened. She knows. She knows Rupert. He has been here. He has reminded her of his love for his dear, sweet cousin. He has told her what will happen when he is her guardian. She has been living in terror, waiting for the deadline, waiting for me to fail. He slumped into his own chair, the Iron Duke finally, utterly defeated. I did not know how to be gentle. I only know how to fight. So I locked her away. I told her to be invisible. I tried to build a fortress of stone and silence around her. I thought if he couldn't see her, he couldn't get her. But you were just trapping her in her own fear, Arthur, Clara said, her voice soft. He looked at her, his eyes raw. And what, in God's name, was I supposed to do? I could not find a wife. Not one who would agree. Not in time. Until you. He had done it. He had met the deadline. In the most brutal, unorthodox way possible, he had won. He had saved his sister. So what now? Clara asked. We are married. The birthday will come. You will be 30. The will be satisfied. Yes, Arthur said. But you do not know Rupert, or Mortimer. They have lost. They will not take this defeat gracefully. They will not simply go away. He was right. They had signed a contract at the Riverbank to thwart a legal one. But the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The house was no longer a prison. It was a stronghold, and it was about to be under siege. The 3 days that followed were a strange truce. The revelation of the will changed everything. Arthur was no longer Clara's jailer, but her co-conspirator. He moved her to a suite near Amelia's, and Clara dedicated herself to the terrified girl. She coaxed her into the gardens, began lessons, and for the first time, laughter was heard in Blackwood. Arthur in turn began his own fortifications. Trunks of new clothes arrived for Clara, not from a village, but from London's finest. Among them was a velvet box from Gorard's jewellers, containing a simple, elegant platinum and diamond wedding band. Tomorrow, Arthur said, finding her by the fire that evening, is the day. His birthday. The deadline. My solicitor will be here at noon to file the final papers, but Rupert has been too quiet, and Mortimer has not been seen. They will not let this day pass without a fight. The morning dawned grey and heavy. Clara dressed with care in a deep blue velvet, sliding the new ring onto her finger. She found Arthur in his study, pacing. "They are here," he said, not in greeting. "The solicitors?" "No." He gestured to the window. 2 carriages were on the drive. One was gaudy, Rupert, the other dark and formal, Mortimer. "They have a magistrate with them. They are not coming as attackers. They are coming as saviours. They have a writ for Amelia." A thunderous knock echoed through the house. Mrs. Finch, pale but rigid, announced their arrival. "Let them in, Mrs. Finch," Arthur said, his voice suddenly calm. "Show them to the grand hall." He looked at Clara, his gaze taking in the gown, the ring, and the resolve in her eyes. A flicker of pride crossed his face. "You," he said, "will come with me." It is time they met my wife. They entered the grand hall to find Lord Mortimer, fleshy and furious, and Rupert Grayson, thin and slick. Between them stood a nervous local magistrate. "Arthur!" Rupert cried, his voice oily. "A happy birthday. We are here on a matter of family, an orphan's welfare." He produced a document. "A writ to take custody of my dear, poor cousin, Amelia. As per the will. Your 30th birthday. You have failed." "He has not failed," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. All eyes turned to her. Mortimer's face darkened with possessive fury. "You! What is you doing here, dressed as a duchess?" "She is dressed as a duchess," Arthur said, his voice booming, "because she is the duchess. Rupert, Mortimer, may I present my wife, Clara Grayson, Duchess of Blackwood." Rupert's face went from glee to a pasty white. "Wife? What trick is this?" "A desperate, pathetic trick," Mortimer snarled. "He has abducted you, coerced you. Magistrate, this is a sham." "It is no trick," Clara said, stepping forward, holding out her left hand so the new ring blazed. "We were married 4 days ago, by special license." "A lie!" Rupert shrieked. "There's no proof. It's his word and hers. Her word is worthless." "My word, however, is not," said a new voice from the doorway. A small, neat man in solicitor's robes entered. "Mr. Davies," Arthur said with a nod. "Your Grace," the solicitor said. He walked into the hall, case in hand. "I have here the original special license, signed by the Archbishop. I have the parish record, signed by the vicar of St. Swithin's, and I have a sworn affidavit from the vicar himself. The marriage is legal, binding, and was performed before the deadline. The will's clause is satisfied. Amelia Grayson remains in the custody of her brother." Rupert stared at the documents. He had lost. "No," he whispered, a pathetic, snivelling sound. "It's not fair. Her fortune was mine." "Get out," Arthur said, his voice like ice. "This is not over," Mortimer snarled. "Oh, I think it is," Arthur said. "My men will escort you to the property line, and if you ever set foot on Blackwood land again, I will enjoy setting the hounds on you myself." Rupert was weeping. Mortimer was purple with rage. They were beaten, and, with Mrs. Finch showing them the door, they were gone. The hall was silent. Clara felt her legs go weak. Arthur didn't move. "It's done," he breathed. He looked at Clara, his eyes raw. "He touched her, you know. Rupert, when he visited. He promised her things. That is why—" He couldn't finish. He turned and ran up the stairs. Clara followed him to Amelia's room. The girl was playing cards with a maid. "Arthur?" she asked, seeing his face. The Iron Duke stumbled into the room and fell to his knees in front of his little sister. For the first time, Amelia saw her brother cry, silent, racking sobs of a decade's worth of terror and burden finally released. Amelia looked at Clara, confused. Clara nodded, her own eyes filling. "It's all right, Amelia. Clara said. "It's over. You're safe." The girl turned to her brother, her small hand resting on his bowed head. "It's all right, Arthur," she whispered. "You did it. We're safe." The victory was short-lived. While Clara and Amelia brought warmth and laughter back to Blackwood, Arthur warned that Lord Mortimer would not accept defeat. The revenge began with a failed attempt to plant a spy, but escalated when masked men tried to abduct Amelia from her carriage. Clara and her coachman barely escaped, confirming Mortimer's dangerous intentions. Enraged, Arthur refused to fight in the shadows. He rode out, rallying his most powerful peers, including Lord Ashworth. They summoned Mortimer, confronting him not with violence, but with sunlight. Arthur presented irrefutable evidence: the coachman's testimony, a spy's confession, and a damning statement from Clara's own uncle, Lord Bromwell, detailing the entire conspiracy. Facing total social and financial ruin, Mortimer was exiled by his peers. The siege was truly over. That night, Arthur returned to Clara, admitting he couldn't have won alone. He touched her cheek, his first gesture of pure tenderness. Their alliance, forged in crisis, was finally sealed with a kiss, transforming their cold contract into a true partnership. Months later, Arthur approached Clara in her parlour. In his hand was their original, desperate contract. He presented her with new documents, an annulment, a deed to a coastal dower house, and a vast annuity. He was offering her freedom, a choice she never had, believing he had only offered her a gilded cage. Clara stared at the papers, her escape route finally made real. Then, in one decisive move, she tossed the new documents into the fire, watching her offered freedom turn to ash. "That," she said softly, "was your choice, not mine." She then took the original contract from the riverbank, the one that bound them. "This is what bound me," she said, before letting it too fall into the flames. "But this," she whispered, placing her hand over his heart, "is what binds me." He stared, undone. "You would stay?" "I am not staying," Clara said, rising to kiss him. "I am here. You are my husband, Arthur. Not by contract, but by choice." He pulled her close, his arms finally holding not a prisoner, but a wife. The escape route had led her home. And so, the escape route that led to a cold riverbank became the foundation of a new life. The contract, once a symbol of her capture, was replaced by a vow freely given. Clara and Arthur, the Duchess and the Iron Duke, had found in each other not just a shield from the world, but a reason to live in it. Their story wasn't just about survival, it was about finding love in the most unexpected of bargains. What did you think of Clara's choice? Let us know in the comments. If you loved this story of drama and devotion, please hit that like button. Share this video with a fellow romance lover, and be sure to subscribe for more tales of history, heart, and incredible twists. We have a new story waiting for you every week.